She was known in her neighborhood as just an ordinary woman. Nothing about her life seemed out of the ordinary. She lived in a small house with walls painted in soft colors, and her days were filled with the kind of routines that most people would call simple. Every morning, she would wake up early, brew herself a cup of tea, and sit by the window watching the street slowly come alive. Children would pass by with their school bags, men would hurry toward their jobs, and shopkeepers would lift the shutters of their stores. She would smile at the familiar rhythm of life, one she had known for years. People in the community saw her as kind, polite, and gentle, but they never thought of her as someone extraordinary. She didn't boast about anything she knew, she didn't carry herself with arrogance, and she never tried to be the center of attention. She liked to listen more than speak, and when she did speak, her words were often soft but thoughtful. Because she lived in such a simple way, many assumed she had no hidden talents or deep knowledge that could surprise them. Her days were peaceful. She often helped her neighbors when they needed an extra hand, sometimes looking after children when their parents were busy, sometimes bringing warm meals to an elderly man who lived alone across the street. She loved reading, though few noticed that about her. When the street was quiet and the sun was high, she would sit with an old, worn-out book in her lap, tracing the words with her finger as though she were learning something precious. Books were her real companions, and though she didn't speak of it, she had read about many things that others might consider too difficult or too heavy. Among her favorite subjects was mathematics. It was not the kind of math children groaned about when they were given homework, but the kind of math that made her heart race, the kind that felt like a puzzle waiting to be unlocked. She found beauty in numbers, in patterns, in the quiet certainty that problems always had answers if one looked at them the right way. But she kept this love for math private. To her, it was not something to boast about, it was something personal, almost like a secret treasure she didn't need to show anyone. Because she didn't display this side of herself, people around her assumed she was simply a woman who managed her small life with care. They didn't know that behind her calm eyes lay a sharp mind that loved solving challenges. They only saw her carrying groceries, sweeping her porch, or speaking kindly with neighbors. It never occurred to them that she could think faster than many of the highly educated men who lived in the city nearby. One afternoon, a group of young students from the local college passed by her street. They were excitedly talking about a math contest that was being organized in the city. The contest, they said, included problems so difficult that even some professors struggled to solve them. As they spoke, they laughed about one particular problem that had become known as the impossible problem. Apparently, many had tried and failed to solve it. Some even claimed it was unsolvable. The woman listened quietly from her porch, not saying a word, but inside her mind something sparked. She wondered what kind of problem it could be, and without realizing it, she felt a small thrill at the thought of trying it. The students noticed her smile and teased lightly, asking if she understood what they were saying. They didn't mean harm, but their tone carried the assumption that she could never know about such things. She only nodded and went back inside her home, but the conversation lingered in her thoughts. She imagined what it would feel like to face such a problem, and she remembered the many nights she had spent solving puzzles in her old notebooks, scribbling down equations, and losing herself in the world of numbers. That evening, she pulled out one of her notebooks from a drawer. The pages were filled with numbers, calculations, and notes from her years of quiet study. She had no degree, no certificates, but she had patience and passion. She began writing down problems from memory, solving them one by one, as though preparing herself for something she could not yet name. It was not ambition that drove her, but curiosity and love for the subject. In the days that followed, whispers of the contest spread more widely. It became the talk of the town, and even those who didn't care much about math began to speak of it. The impossible problem became a challenge that everyone admired from afar, something they believed was reserved for geniuses, professors, and scientists. Nobody thought that an ordinary woman from a quiet neighborhood would ever stand before it. She listened to all the talk, but she never revealed what she felt inside. She knew how people saw her, and she had no desire to argue with their opinions. Instead, she let them believe what they wanted, while she continued with her life as usual. But each time she heard about the problem, her interest grew deeper. She wanted to see it with her own eyes, to test herself, to know whether her mind could uncover its solution. The day came when the contest was finally held. Posters had been hung on walls, announcements were made, and the hall where it was to take place filled with eager students, teachers, and townsfolk who came to watch. The problem was displayed on a large board, its symbols and numbers intimidating to many. People shook their heads and whispered that it was truly impossible. The air buzzed with anticipation, mixed with doubt. The woman, who had walked quietly to the hall, stood at the back, watching. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She looked out of place among the students in their crisp uniforms and the professors with their polished shoes. Nobody noticed her at first, she blended in with the crowd, just another face in the audience. Yet within her heart was a calm determination, and her eyes studied the problem with sharp focus. For her, this was not just about numbers on a board. It was about proving something to herself, that the years she had spent in quiet study had meaning, that her love for math was not a private game but a real gift. She knew the world might not expect anything from her, but she expected something from herself. She wanted to step forward, to test the strength of her mind, and to see if she could solve what so many had failed to solve. And as she stood there, unnoticed, the first threads of her remarkable story were being woven. What the audience and the participants did not yet know was that this simple woman, whom they had never considered remarkable, was about to surprise them all in a way they would never forget. The contest hall was buzzing with energy that afternoon. Rows of chairs were filled with students, teachers, and curious townspeople who had come only to witness the challenge that had gained so much fame. The stage was set with a large chalkboard that displayed the problem in bold symbols and long equations. At first glance, it looked like a puzzle made to intimidate, not to be solved. Lines of numbers twisted across the board in a way that confused even those who were good at math. Many in the crowd whispered about how the problem had been tested before and that even highly trained mathematicians had walked away defeated. At the front, a few students from the local college took their turns at the board. They stood nervously, markers in hand, staring at the problem as though it were a mountain too tall to climb. Some wrote quickly at first, confident in their approach, but soon their hands slowed. Their eyes darted across the lines, and then they began to erase. The longer they stood there, the more their shoulders sank, as if the weight of the problem pressed them down. One after another, they stepped back, shaking their heads, admitting quietly that they could not solve it. The audience clapped politely for their efforts, but the air was heavy with the sense that the problem truly was impossible. Professors from the college tried as well. Their reputations carried them onto the stage with authority, but even they struggled. Their neat suits and glasses gave them the look of experts, yet when the problem stared back at them, all the knowledge in their heads seemed not enough. Some spent half an hour writing, calculating, and recalculating, but their faces grew pale with defeat. Finally, they too put down their chalk and returned to their seats. The audience began to murmur more loudly, agreeing that the problem lived up to its name. Meanwhile, the woman remained at the back, watching quietly. She didn't laugh at the failures or mock the efforts. Instead, she studied carefully. Her sharp eyes followed every attempt, noting where they started, where they went wrong, and where they hesitated. She wasn't nervous or anxious, she was calm, as if she were watching a familiar dance that others had forgotten the steps to. Her love for numbers guided her thoughts, and while others saw a storm of confusion, she saw patterns hidden within the chaos. The contest organizers announced that anyone could step forward and try. A hush fell across the room. No one seemed eager to volunteer anymore. After so many had failed, the challenge now carried the risk of embarrassment. The hall grew quiet as people avoided eye contact with the organizers, pretending to look elsewhere, not daring to be chosen. That was the moment she felt a pull inside her heart. She had not planned to step forward. She had come only to watch. But something in her whispered that this was her time. She knew that if she walked away, she would regret it for the rest of her life. With steady steps, she rose from her chair. The sound of her movement was soft, but in the silence of the hall, it drew attention. Heads turned. At first, people thought she was simply leaving. But when she walked down the aisle toward the stage, whispers filled the air. "Who is she?" someone asked. "She doesn't look like a student," another muttered. "She's not a professor either," said a third. "Maybe she's lost." But she was not lost. Her footsteps carried her straight to the front, and when she reached the stage, she looked at the organizers with calm eyes and asked if she could try. The organizers were surprised. They had not expected someone like her to volunteer. She was not dressed like the other participants. She wore a simple dress, her hair neatly tied back, and she carried no books, no notes, no bag of tools. She looked like any other woman from the town, someone who might be there only to watch. For a moment, they hesitated. But the rules said anyone could try, and so they nodded. The crowd began to murmur again, this time with doubt and even laughter. Some students exchanged smirks, whispering that it would be amusing to watch her fail. Others shook their heads, saying it was unfair to let her attempt such a task when even the best had failed. But she did not pay attention to their words. Her mind was already focused on the problem before her. She took the marker in her hand and stepped up to the board. For a few seconds, she simply looked at the problem. Her eyes scanned the numbers, the symbols, the equations stretched across the space. To anyone watching, it seemed like she was standing still, unsure of where to begin. But inside her mind, the gears were already turning quickly. She was not staring in confusion. She was searching for the pattern, the key that would unlock the puzzle. Her fingers tapped lightly against the marker as she thought. She recalled the years she had spent solving problems on her own, late at night with only the quiet ticking of a clock as company. She remembered the notebooks she had filled, the mistakes she had corrected, the lessons she had taught herself. All those hours had prepared her for this moment, though she had never known it. Then, with a calm breath, she placed the marker to the board and began to write. Her movements were not rushed, but they carried confidence. She drew clean lines, wrote equations, and moved from step to step with precision. The audience leaned forward, their laughter fading into silence. Something about the way she wrote was different. It was not the hesitant scratching of someone unsure. It was the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Seconds passed, then half a minute. People exchanged glances, their eyebrows rising. She had not stopped, not erased, not paused to think. Her hand flowed smoothly, as though the problem was not impossible but simple. 40 seconds ticked by, and then, with a final stroke, she underlined her answer. The hall was silent. The sound of her marker clicking closed echoed loudly in the stillness. She stepped back from the board and laid the marker on the table beside her. Then she turned quietly, her face calm, and walked back a step. The organizers rushed forward, their eyes wide. They scanned her work, checking line by line. Their mouths parted in shock. The solution was not only correct, but it was elegant, done with a clarity that showed deep understanding. She had solved the impossible problem in 47 seconds. Gasps filled the hall. Students stared in disbelief, professors adjusted their glasses, and the audience rose from their seats to see better. Nobody spoke at first. The silence was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of shock, of 100 people realizing that everything they thought they knew had just been overturned. And there she stood, not smiling, not boasting, simply waiting quietly as though she had done nothing special at all. To her, it had been a puzzle like any other, one she had solved with love and patience. But to everyone else, it was a moment that would be remembered forever. The silence in the hall lingered for a long moment after she put down the marker. It was a silence filled with disbelief, confusion, and awe. Everyone had expected her to fail, just as the students and professors before her had failed. Yet here she stood, calm and composed, having done what no one else could do. The air felt charged, as if something impossible had just happened right before their eyes. Slowly, the silence broke into scattered murmurs. Some whispered that it must be a mistake. Others leaned forward to study the board, hoping to find an error. The professors crowded closer, scanning every line she had written, and with each passing second, their shock only grew deeper. There was no mistake. The solution was perfect, clean, and precise. It was the kind of solution that showed not only intelligence but also a deep understanding of mathematics. Those who knew the subject well realized immediately that she hadn't stumbled upon the answer by chance. She had solved it with purpose, as though she had known exactly where to go from the very beginning. For the professors who had struggled for half an hour and failed, it was humbling to admit that a woman they had never seen before had solved it in less than a minute. Students in the audience sat with wide eyes. Some of them had laughed earlier, whispering that it would be amusing to watch her fail. Now, those same students sat frozen, unable to believe what they had witnessed. A few looked embarrassed, remembering their careless words. Others were struck with admiration, though they were too stunned to voice it. The organizers stood speechless for a few moments. They had expected the contest to go on much longer. They had expected the problem to remain unsolved, something to boast about as proof of how difficult it was. But now, in less than a minute, all their expectations had been turned upside down. One of them finally found his voice and announced loudly that the problem had been solved. His words echoed across the hall, and the audience erupted in gasps and exclamations. The woman stood quietly through it all, her hands folded gently in front of her. She did not raise her chin in pride, nor did she look around for applause. She simply waited, as though she had completed a small task and was ready to return home. In her heart, she felt a quiet joy, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had finally tested herself in front of others and proven what she had always known deep inside, that her love for numbers was real, and her ability to solve problems was not just a private dream. But the people around her could not remain calm. They crowded the front of the hall, asking who she was, where she had studied, and how she had done it. Some were skeptical, insisting there must be some trick. They asked her to explain her steps. She obliged, walking them through her solution with a steady voice. As she explained, her words were simple, not wrapped in complex terms. She spoke with clarity, breaking down the problem into parts that even those less familiar with mathematics could understand. It became obvious to all that she had not only solved the problem but also understood it in a way that many others did not. The professors exchanged uneasy glances. Their pride had taken a blow, but even they had to admit that what she had done was extraordinary. Some of them approached her with respect, congratulating her, while others struggled with their own disbelief. The students, too, began to surround her. The same young men who had teased her earlier now asked her questions with genuine curiosity. It was as if the entire hall had turned to face her, drawn by the quiet strength she carried. In the crowd, however, there were mixed emotions. While many admired her, some could not accept what they had seen. They muttered that it was unfair, that perhaps she had seen the problem before, or that she had received help somehow. Doubt is often the shadow that follows achievement, and in that hall, it appeared quickly. Yet no matter how hard they looked, they found no evidence to support their doubts. The organizers confirmed that the problem had been carefully guarded, revealed only on the day of the contest. It was impossible for her to have prepared for it in advance. Still, Whispers of suspicion floated through the room. But the louder voice, the one that filled the air with energy, was the voice of amazement. People who had come expecting only entertainment now realized they had witnessed history. A simple woman, unknown to the academic world, had done what was believed to be impossible. And she had done it with a calmness that made it all the more remarkable. News of the event spread quickly. By the next day, the story was being told in tea shops, on street corners, and in classrooms. People repeated it with wide eyes, adding their own flavor to the tale. Some said she solved it in under a minute, others exaggerated to say she had done it in seconds. But one fact remained the same in every version: she had solved the impossible problem when nobody else could. Back at her home, she continued her life as usual. She swept her porch, greeted her neighbors, and sat by her window with her tea. To her, nothing had changed. She had simply followed her heart and her passion for mathematics. But for the world around her, everything was different now. She was no longer invisible. Her neighbors looked at her with new eyes, realizing that the woman they had always thought of as ordinary was anything but. The professors at the college discussed her endlessly. Some wanted to meet her again, to understand where she had learned, and perhaps to invite her to speak. Others were less eager, their pride still wounded, but they could not ignore her. The students, too, found themselves inspired. If someone like her, with no grand titles or degrees, could achieve what she had, then perhaps they too could dream beyond the limits they had set for themselves. The woman, however, did not bask in the attention. She preferred her quiet life. She did not crave fame or recognition. Yet she could not deny that the experience had changed something within her. For the first time, she realized that her love for math was not something she had to keep hidden. It was a gift, one that could inspire others. She began to think about how she might share this gift, not through grand speeches or by seeking attention, but in her own gentle way. The memory of that day remained vivid in her mind. She remembered the faces of disbelief, the silence that had fallen when she finished, the awe in the eyes of those who had once doubted her. It was not pride that filled her, but gratitude. Gratitude for the years she had spent in study, for the quiet nights with her notebooks, and for the courage that had pushed her to step forward. What no one knew at the time was that this was only the beginning. The contest had been the stage where her talent was revealed, but her journey was not over. The world had seen her brilliance for the first time, but there would be more moments ahead, moments when her mind, her courage, and her humility would continue to surprise those around her. And so, as the sun set on that remarkable day, the simple woman returned home, carrying within her a new sense of purpose. She had stepped into the spotlight for a brief moment, not to seek glory, but to answer a challenge. In doing so, she had changed the way people saw her, and perhaps even the way people saw the world. For if she could solve the impossible in 47 seconds, what other impossibilities might be waiting to be broken? The days after the contest felt different in the town. What had started as a quiet challenge inside a hall had now become a story carried on every street, every shop, and every gathering. People spoke about the woman as though she had performed a miracle. They said she had walked calmly to the board, solved the problem in under a minute, and left everyone in silence. Some even added their own twists, saying her hand moved so fast it was as though the numbers themselves obeyed her. No matter how the story was told, the essence remained the same: she had done what others could not, and she had done it with grace. For the woman herself, life seemed much the same on the outside. She still rose early, swept her porch, and brewed her tea. She still greeted her neighbors with a gentle smile. But there was a new energy around her. Neighbors who once overlooked her now stopped to talk longer. Children pointed at her with admiration, whispering that she was the genius who had solved the impossible. Even those who had doubted her before now watched her with a quiet respect, though some carried hints of envy they could not hide. The college professors could not let the matter rest. They gathered in meetings, discussing what had happened. Some of them wanted to invite her formally, to see if her ability was genuine or if what they had seen was a rare stroke of luck. Others resisted, their pride still bruised, but the pressure from the students and townspeople grew stronger. Finally, they reached out to her, sending an invitation to visit the college. When she received the letter, she read it carefully and smiled softly. She had never imagined being invited to such a place. The college was a place of learning and recognition, full of people who had studied for years. She had never set foot in its halls. She wondered what they wanted from her. Still, she agreed to go, not out of pride, but because she felt it might be a chance to share her love for numbers in a way she had never done before. The day she arrived at the college, students lined the hallways to see her. They expected her to walk in with grandeur, perhaps with books in her arms or dressed like a scholar. But she came as she always was, simple, calm, and unhurried. She wore a plain dress, carried nothing but herself, and smiled gently at those who stared at her with wide eyes. The professors greeted her politely, though some could barely hide their discomfort. They led her to a classroom where a chalkboard was ready, filled with another difficult problem, one they believed might truly test her. She stood quietly, looking at the board. Once again, whispers filled the room. Some thought she would finally fail. Others believed she would amaze them again. She did not let their voices reach her heart. She studied the problem, closed her eyes for a moment, and let her mind work through the puzzle. Then, with the same calmness as before, she began to write. Step by step, her solution took shape. This time it took longer than 47 seconds, but still, she finished far more quickly than anyone expected. Her answer was correct. Gasps filled the room again. The professors, though humbled, could no longer doubt her. They asked her questions, trying to understand how she thought, how she learned, how she practiced. She explained simply that she loved numbers, that she had spent years solving problems on her own, guided only by books and her curiosity. There was no magic, no trick, only love, patience, and dedication. Her words touched many. Students who had once groaned at the thought of math now listened with new respect. They saw that brilliance did not always come with titles or certificates. Sometimes, it came quietly, hidden in a person who lived a simple life but carried extraordinary gifts. The professors, after much discussion, offered her an opportunity to teach a few sessions at the college. At first, she hesitated. She had never imagined herself as a teacher standing before students in a formal classroom. But then she realized it was a chance to share the joy she found in numbers, to help others see math not as a burden but as a world of beauty. She accepted, and so began a new chapter in her life. Her classes were unlike the usual ones. She did not overwhelm students with heavy terms or complex theories at first. Instead, she spoke in simple language, showing them how numbers danced together, how patterns could be seen if one only looked closely. She treated math like a story, and slowly, students who once disliked the subject began to lean forward with interest. She showed them that problems were not enemies but puzzles waiting to be solved. Word of her teaching spread, and soon, more students began attending her sessions. The classroom grew crowded, with not only students but also curious teachers who wanted to see her methods. Some professors admitted quietly that they had learned something from her approach, even though they had studied for decades. Others watched with mixed feelings, caught between admiration and envy. Despite the attention, she remained humble. She walked home each day with the same calmness, carrying no sense of superiority. For her, it was not about fame or recognition. It was about sharing what she loved, about showing others that even the hardest problems could be understood if one approached them with patience and an open mind. The contest had been the turning point, the moment that had revealed her gift to the world. But this new chapter, the chance to teach and inspire others, was the true reward. She saw young students' eyes light up when they understood something for the first time, and it filled her with quiet joy. She realized that solving the impossible problem was not the end of her journey but the beginning of a greater purpose. Yet, not everyone welcomed her presence. There were still voices of doubt. Some critics claimed she was being given too much credit, that her fame was built on a single moment of luck. Others whispered that she did not belong in the halls of higher learning, that she was only a guest who would fade away in time. But she paid no attention to such words. She had lived too many years in simplicity to be shaken by pride or criticism. She continued her work, one step at a time, one class at a time, letting her actions speak louder than their doubts. The town watched her rise with pride. To them, she was proof that greatness could come from anywhere, even from the quietest corners. Parents began encouraging their children more, reminding them of the woman who had solved the impossible. Her story spread beyond the town, reaching nearby cities. People traveled to see her teach, curious to meet the woman who had shocked a hall full of experts in less than a minute. And through it all, she remained the same simple woman, gentle in her words, patient in her ways, and deeply in love with the world of numbers. She had never asked for recognition, but it had found her. She had never sought to change lives, but she was doing so, one lesson at a time. Each evening, when she returned home, she sat once again by her window with her tea. She looked out at the street, at children laughing, at neighbors chatting, and she felt grateful. She had not chased greatness, it had come to her when she had followed her heart. And now, her life carried a new meaning, one that she embraced with humility. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more doubts, more tests, more moments where she would need to prove herself. But she also knew she was ready. The day she solved the impossible problem had shown her not only her strength but also her path. She was no longer invisible. She was a beacon of inspiration, a reminder that simplicity could hold extraordinary power. The woman's story continued to travel far beyond her small town. What had begun as whispers in the contest hall grew into news that reached neighboring cities and even distant places. People were curious about her not just because she had solved a difficult problem, but because of who she was. She was not a professor with many degrees, not a famous scholar, and not a celebrated genius who had been known before. She was a simple woman, living an ordinary life, who had shown extraordinary talent in the most unexpected way. This contrast made her story even more powerful, and it touched hearts everywhere. For her, however, life remained rooted in simplicity. She still cherished her quiet mornings, her books, and her moments of reflection. She still carried herself with humility, never claiming to be more than what she was. Fame did not change her habits. She did not demand recognition, nor did she use her gift to seek wealth or power. Instead, she continued to teach at the college in her calm, gentle way, sharing her love of numbers with anyone willing to learn. Her classes grew larger over time. Students who once feared math now approached it with curiosity. They often said that the way she explained problems made them feel as if they were listening to a story rather than a lesson. She did not make them feel small when they struggled, instead, she guided them with patience until they understood. This approach not only built their skills but also gave them confidence. Many young learners said they had begun to see math in a new light, no longer as a barrier but as a bridge to discovery. She often told her students that talent alone was never enough. What mattered most, she said, was patience, practice, and the willingness to look at problems from different angles. She reminded them that every mistake was not a failure but a lesson, a step closer to understanding. Her words carried weight because they came not from someone distant and unreachable but from someone who lived among them, someone who had once been overlooked as ordinary. As time passed, she became more than a teacher. She became a symbol. To many, she represented the idea that brilliance could come from anywhere. To women, especially those who had been told their place was only in the home or that they were not capable of greatness, she became a quiet source of strength. They saw in her story proof that intelligence and determination were not bound by gender, status, or education. To children, she became a figure of hope, someone they could look up to and say, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Still, her journey was not without challenges. Some people continued to question her. There were those who said her achievement was exaggerated, that perhaps the problem had not been as impossible as it was claimed to be. Others suggested that she had been lucky, that she might not be able to repeat such a performance. She never argued with them. Instead, she let her actions and her teaching speak for her. Each time she explained a complex problem with clarity, each time a struggling student found confidence through her guidance, her quiet strength silenced the doubts. There were also moments of pressure. Invitations arrived from larger institutions, asking her to travel, to give speeches, to take part in events where scholars from all over the country gathered. Some saw these as great opportunities, but she remained thoughtful. She had no desire to chase fame or recognition. She chose carefully, attending only those events where she felt she could truly inspire others. When she did appear, she spoke simply, never with grand words or complicated speeches. She told her story honestly, shared her love for learning, and reminded her listeners that greatness often hides in unexpected places. Her humility made her even more admired. She could have easily turned her achievement into pride, but she never did. She always said she was just a woman who loved solving puzzles, nothing more. People admired her even more for that. In a world where many tried to boast of their knowledge, her calm and unassuming nature made her stand out. Years passed, but the memory of the day she solved the impossible problem never faded. It remained a story told to new students each year, a reminder that courage and curiosity could achieve wonders. Professors who had once doubted her began to respect her deeply. Some even admitted that her teaching methods had changed the way they themselves approached students. Her influence spread beyond mathematics. People began to see her as a reminder that no one should be underestimated. The neighbors who once thought of her as just another simple woman now saw her as a symbol of hidden strength. Children in the town grew up hearing her story, and many carried that lesson into their own lives, that greatness can be found in anyone, anywhere, at any time. Through it all, she remained unchanged. She still returned to her small home each evening, still brewed her tea, still found comfort in her books. Sometimes, when she looked out of her window at the street below, she thought of how much her life had shifted from the moment she stepped forward in that contest hall. Yet, she also felt that at her core, she was still the same. She had not solved the problem to gain fame. She had solved it because she loved the challenge, because numbers spoke to her heart in ways words never could. That love was still with her, and it guided her every day. As she grew older, she began to spend more time sharing not only math but also her life lessons with her students and neighbors. She told them about the importance of humility, of kindness, of helping others. She explained that knowledge was never meant to be a tool for pride but a gift to be shared. Her words carried the weight of experience, and those who listened felt their hearts moved, not just their minds. Looking back, many realized that the greatest part of her story was not the 47 seconds in which she solved the impossible problem. The true greatness lay in how she lived afterward with humility, generosity, and a quiet determination to uplift others. She had shown the world that one moment of brilliance could open doors, but it was the choices made afterward that defined a person's legacy. Her legacy was not written in books of records or grand awards, though she received recognition. Her legacy was written in the lives she touched, in the students who carried forward her lessons, in the women who found courage through her example, and in the town that would never again overlook the quiet strength of a simple woman. And so, the story of the woman who solved the impossible problem in 47 seconds remained alive long after the moment had passed. It lived in every whisper of admiration, in every child who dreamed bigger, and in every person who learned to look beyond appearances. It was a story of patience, courage, and love for knowledge. It was a story that proved the extraordinary often hides in the most ordinary places. She herself never called it extraordinary. To her, it was just a puzzle, just numbers on a board. But to the world, it was proof that miracles could happen, not through magic, but through dedication, humility, and the quiet brilliance of a mind that never stopped learning.